There is a story in this family, too old now to prove. It says the mother was the one who pushed to leave Switzerland. Elizabeth had looked at her 4 sons and at a country that sold its young men to foreign wars and decided she would rather risk an ocean.
From the Caspar Glattfelder Association of America, this is the Glattfelder Gazette, Season 1, Episode 3.
The tradition holds that Elizabeth was ready and willing to make the crossing because she did not want her sons conscripted someday and sent abroad, as so many thousands of young Swiss men were in those years, to fight and die as hired soldiers in other kings' wars. She had looked at her children, done the arithmetic of the country she lived in, and decided she would rather risk an ocean than watch that happen to them. Her fear made sense in the country she lived in, because 18th century Switzerland sold its young men. The cantons ran a steady business, renting them out as soldiers to the great powers of Europe, France above all. Swiss regiments fought and bled in foreign service by the tens of thousands. The pay came home. The men very often did not. Whole families learned to count on the soldier's wage and to dredge the news that came with it. This was an industry, not a rare stroke of bad luck. A poor canton produced soldiers the way other places produced timber or salt, and sold them by the regiment to whoever was hiring. A boy could march off at 16 and be gone for years, or for good, and what came back to the family was the money and an empty chair. For a mother with 4 sons, none of this was abstract. It was a likely future built into the economy of the place she lived, and she could see it coming for her boys, the way you can see weather coming over a ridge. It helps to remember what Elizabeth had already survived by the time she made this decision. She married Caspar in the spring of 1731, and over the next 11 years she gave birth to 7 children. 3 of them she buried as infants. Her first child, a son named Felix, lived 4 days. A daughter, Anna Margaretha, lived about 6 weeks. A son she named Salomon died at 6 months, and when she had another boy 2 years later, she named him Salomon too, the way grieving families did then, refusing to let the name die with the child. That second, Salomon lived. So did 3 others, Margaret, Anna, and a baby boy named John. By the time she packed for America, Elizabeth had buried close to half the children she had borne. Whatever else the New World might prove to be, it held no terror that could match the ones she had already lived through at home. She was a mother in her 30s who had already stood at the edge of 3 small graves, and who was not willing to lose the sons who remained to a recruiter's ledger. Once you know that, the family tradition stops sounding sentimental and starts sounding exactly right. She had buried enough children to the things she could not control. She would not surrender the rest to the one thing she could. She was far from alone in wanting out, and the authorities knew it. So many people were leaving parts of Switzerland in the 1730s and 1740s that cantonal governments grew afraid of losing their populations outright. They issued decrees to discourage emigration, and they reached for the only lever governments ever really have, which is money. They imposed penalties on the people leaving, and penalties even on anyone who dared buy the property the emigrants were trying to sell. A family bound for America might have to take a hard loss on everything it could not carry, knowing it would never come back to reclaim any of it. Leaving meant far more than packing a wagon. It was a costly, one-way act that the state itself worked to make as painful as it could. We can measure how little that effort accomplished. In 1744, the government of the canton of Zurich asked the pastor of each parish to write down the name and age of every person who had left for Pennsylvania or the Carolinas in the previous 10 years. The reports that survive list 2,300 people gone from that one canton between 1734 and 1744, from the single small parish of Glattfelden, the church Caspar and Elizabeth worshipped in. 53 people had walked away, a whole village's worth of neighbors, decade by decade, reaching the same conclusion the Glattfelders reached. Elizabeth did not have to do it alone, and that may be part of how she found the nerve. 6 households from Glattfelden left together in the spring of 1743, a small column of relatives and neighbors moving as one. Her own sister, Dorothy, came with her husband, Henry Walter. So did the widow and children of Caspar's late brother. They went down the Rhine in stages, paying a toll at every petty border, the trip itself stretching into weeks before they ever reached the open sea at Rotterdam. A family that leaves that way is not bolting on impulse. It is going on purpose together, having decided that whatever waited across the water beat the certainty behind them. We should be honest about the limits of what we know. The historian who assembled this family's record is careful to say that we simply do not know in the end exactly why Caspar and Elizabeth chose to go, or how long they waited before they did. The mercenary fear is family tradition, not a signed statement. Caspar himself was probably moved by the same plain hope that moved most of his neighbors, the belief that life would be better sooner or later for his children in a new country. The decision belonged to both of them, but the tradition has always laid the determination at Elizabeth's feet, and traditions like that tend to survive because somebody who was there knew them to be true. What makes her story hard is what came next, and we are not going to soften it. Elizabeth Glattfelder never saw America. She got her family onto the boats. She came down the Rhine and boarded the Francis and Elizabeth at Rotterdam with her husband, her aging father, and her 4 surviving children. Somewhere on that crossing, or in the first raw days after the ship reached Philadelphia, she died along with the baby John, who was not yet a year old when they left home. There is no record of it. There is only the silence where her name should keep appearing, and does not. The family that walked off the boat and began building a life in Pennsylvania did so without the woman whose will, by the family's own account, had set the whole thing in motion. She had wanted to keep her sons out of the foreign wars, and she did. Solomon, the boy named for his dead brother, grew up in Pennsylvania a free man, learned the blacksmith's trade, raised 9 children of his own, and died in his bed at 80. Her other sons came through as well. The boys she carried onto that ship grew up to work their own ground and sign their own deeds, answering to no foreign crown. Not one of them was ever sold to a war. The thing Elizabeth feared most never came near any of them. The crossing she fought for is the reason. She bought that outcome with her life and never lived to know she had won. This is the part of her story worth carrying into your own. We talk a great deal in families about the people who built what we have. We picture them arriving and growing old, surrounded by the results. But a great many of the decisions that shaped a family were made by people who never saw them pay off. Elizabeth decided. Someone else collected. She is barely in the family record at all, a name that appears for a marriage and 4 baptisms, and then goes quiet over open water, and still there is a plain truth underneath all of it. Every Glattfelder alive is here because a mother in a Swiss village looked at her sons, counted the cost, and chose the ocean. Most of. What any of us inherits was decided by someone who did not stay to enjoy it. The savings that paid for a thing, the move that opened a door, the hard call made by a parent or a grandparent who is no longer at the table to be thanked. Elizabeth Laufer Glattfelder is the oldest version of that truth this family owns. She wanted her children safe and free more than she wanted her own place in the new world. She got the first and missed the second. We are the proof the trade was worth making, and the least we owe her is to remember she was the one who made it.
If these stories mean something to you, share them with your family and invite them to subscribe. It's free at glattfelder.news/subscribe. Whatever your last name is today, Glattfelder, Glattfelter, Clodfelter, Gladfelter. This is where the family sits down and talks to itself about where it came from. Speak the names again.